Wow. Hey, it feels very intimidating to stand here in front of you all, I got to tell you that. But I'm very excited to be here, and I'm really thankful you all showed up. So I'm going to switch slides here. That worked. OK, first hurdle passed. My name is Rasmus, and today we're going to take it down a notch, a notch, a notch, a notch, a couple of hundred other notches from the keynote, which was like freaking amazing. And we're going to have a little bit of fun, I hope. And we will spend about 30 minutes looking at a couple of things that have been right in front of us this whole time, but we might not have thought of. And then we will spend 10, 15 minutes or so after that with a Q&A session. So as I'm talking through this and you're seeing this and maybe you have some thoughts, maybe you do a yawn, I hope not. Think about some fun, interesting questions. I would really recommend that you stick to the topic that we're talking about today, but other questions are OK as well. OK. I was told I should tell a little bit about myself. I was born in Sweden, and so that means that I always feel like an imposter wherever I go, and I will never tell you that I'm good at anything. And so I'm not going to tell you that I'm good at anything today. But I will tell you that I have been working with software design for about 25 years now, since the 1990s. I've been at various different companies. I worked actually for Figma for 5 years. And I will tell you a little bit more about something else that I'm working on at the end of this talk as a little bonus piece. Anyhow, through my career, I have, and my hobbies, this kind of sometimes it blends together. I have seen some things that I built intuition for, and then usually it would be a colleague of mine who was like, no, dude, it's like, this is what's going on. And I was like, I haven't thought of that, And so let me share some of these things with you all. And again, there's a Q&A later. If you happen to think about something else that you haven't seen here, there's a little big detail. Also, sorry, I forgot. The obligatory child photo. This was my cool peakness. And from there, it's just been, whew. OK, so we got that cleared out. We're going to jump into a couple of little big details. The first of it being the humble blinking text cursor, which there is none here. Try to find the text cursor on the screen right now. OK, I see a couple of people pointing. You saw it. I mean, you're designers, a lot of you. You got that eye, right? So now I'm going to turn on the blinking here. And now you can see it. Now it doesn't require a lot of effort to find the text cursor. It's kind of blinking there. It calls our attention. This is pretty important. So the text cursor, it kind of blinks to help us locate it when it's at rest. And at rest, I'll get to that in a second. Here's another video. It just shows me typing around a little bit. It's just a regular text editor here. As I'm typing, pay attention to, and deleting, pay attention to that the text cursor is no longer blinking. It's just solid. And as I'm stopped typing, it starts blinking again. And then as I'm moving around, it stops blinking. And this might not be obvious to us, but it's something we use probably every day. And when the text cursor, I'm sorry I don't have a video for this, but when the text cursor stops or keeps blinking as we're typing, it gets very confusing. So it turns out that while we're writing, our gaze, where our eyes are looking, is focused on the cursor, the little blinking thing. That shouldn't be blinking, not the actual letters that we're typing. We're kind of either ahead or behind. So it's very important that this little humble text cursor is solid as we're moving around, and that it's blinking when we're trying to find it on the screen. Okay. And so the way this usually works is that there's a little timer in the software, and the timer is reset. And when the timer expires, it starts blinking, and then it's reset. This is not a new idea. This came about a long time ago. Some people realized that, it's kind of hard to find the text cursor. And so, of course, as you did in the 1960s, you implement it in hardware. But of course, we don't do that today. Also, it looked kind of more like this little video you see on the left side here, rather than this sort of the in-between letters cursor that most of us are used to today. Okay. So takeaway from this, the cursor here, it should be easy to find, but also stable and predictable while it is moving. All right, so stop blinking. And another thing I think is interesting is that there's some room for fun here. You can imagine maybe it wiggles a little bit, Does it have to blink? Maybe there's a different way we can call attention to the cursor while it's at rest. OK, so I'm going to show you, we're going to go through 5 more of these little things. And as I do, I will have these little cut and dry slides that say takeaway : so we're going to stick with this format for a couple of more minutes. OK, on to the next thing, another text cursor thing, but this time it's a little bit more tricky. It's a little bit more complicated. So here's another video, and we see me just moving around. I'm not typing or anything. I'm just moving, pressing up and down on my keyboard, little arrows. And as I'm doing that, you might notice that as I'm going up and down here now, and then go to the right, and then down and up, the cursor goes up and down to different places. This probably just feels natural. You look at it like, I don't get it. Obviously, duh, But there's actually some fairly complicated logic going on here. So let's dive into that and have a look. OK, so we start with a cursor here at the bottom. And now we say, go up. OK, so the cursor goes up. This is the best location, right? We can't go straight into the O, and we shouldn't go to the other side of the O, so we kind of go in between. Natural, no fuss, right? Now we say go down. So what's going to happen? Well, we just do the same thing. We go down. But this doesn't feel right. Now we ended up in a different place, right? We just went up, and then we changed our mind, so we went down. And now our cursor is in a different place. We were to the right side of the L before. And so let's try this again. So we go up. So we rewind history here. So we go down, and this is where we want it to be, where we started, right? This is better. That's kind of complicated. And it might be hard to get a grasp around now when you see these slides rather than the video. And I'm sorry about that if that is confusing, but bear with me. OK. So what's going on here? Here we see a video again. Hopefully this is better. So it goes up and down, goes up and down. See? OK. So it turns out that each line has a piece of memory. How we can remember to call our mom on Sundays or something like that. And so we start out by just putting our cursor down. Maybe we use a pointer or a touch. And now we say, OK, let's memorize where we put this cursor on this line. It's position number 4. OK? And now I'm going to say, go up on my keyboard. And the same thing is going to happen as it did before. And the way we do this, we just find the closest, the shortest distance here, right, to the insertion point. That's going to be insertion point number 4. So we put our cursor there, no fuss. Here, we memorize where the cursor is on this line. And now we go down again, and we just recall from memory where we were before. And now we got the behavior that we wanted, right? Now it feels natural, and now we kind of have debunked what was going on with this weird little text cursor. But it's not the full story. So let's go to the left 2 points. OK? So we're over here now. If I go up now, what happens? I just sort of told you a truth/lie. We don't just recall from memory, because if we do, we would go up here, and we would probably end up at position number 4 if we just recall from memory, because remember, our memory is number 4 from that line. That's definitely not what we want, right? If we go from 2 there up there, we probably want to go to the other position 2 after the E. And so here we're gonna do that, OK? So we're gonna have to take distance into consideration even when we have memory. So takeaway, This is some complex stuff going on here. Whenever you're sort of poised with the possibility of reimagining text editing, really think carefully about that before you do. I'm not saying you shouldn't, but if you do, like, think about it. It's there's a lot more to this than what I'll share with you now. Way more than can fit into a talk. Anyhow, but never be afraid of breaking the status quo. On to the next thing. A pet peeve of mine. I love these little menus. So we have a video here. It's opening the same pop-up menu twice, using two different methods. And it might be a little subtle. I've tried to show you what's going on with my finger. In the bottom right corner, you see sort of a stylized finger. When it's sort of high contrast and down, I'm holding down my mouse button. And when it's not, I'm not holding it down. So I'm going to stop talking for just a few seconds so we can look at this. OK. In one mode, I'm clicking. The menu opens. I move my mouse around. And I select something, and I click to select it, and it closes. The other time when I'm doing this, I hold my finger down. You can see that right now. I hold my finger down, and then I release the finger, and it performs the same action. How is that possible? How can we tell that apart, right? That's kind of tricky. And so, as far as I know, this was an invention that came from Mac OS. Now, I could be wrong. I've tried to do my homework. I've tried many, many versions of old Mac OSs in virtual machines to find out. And here we have a recording of one of those that I tried out. And early on, this was actually the only way of operating menus in Mac OS. There was no, that most of us do today, I think. Click, move, click. You had to just press, move, and release. And so kind of how this works, lifting the rug off the floor and seeing if there's anything under there. Or maybe a better analogy is the hood of a car. An old car, I suppose. The new ones, is just the brand on it. And so what's going on is again, it's just the time, the temporal dimension, which is really hard to express on a slideshow. But I hope this helps. And so what's going on is, as we're pressing down on the menu, so when we got, if you think about like a mouse down event in kind of a web browser, we open the menu right away. We don't wait for like a click. So we open the menu. And now if the person lifts up their finger within a certain period of time, we consider that a click, and we just keep the menu open. But if the person keeps pressing the mouse button past this duration of time, and in this example it's 200 milliseconds, but it varies, then we will close the menu, and we will select whatever was under the mouse cursor when they did, or mouse pointer. So it's a little thing. Some people are sort of going to expect this. So the takeaway here is to use system menus whenever you can. I know that's not always possible. And certainly when I worked at Figma, we came up with our own menus, and it's a lot of work. So it will save you a lot of time if you can use the system menus. And it might also save you a lot of customer support time, at least from my experience. OK, on to our little buddy, the double click. I wonder if there's anyone in this audience, I'm just curious, who does not use double click? Maybe doesn't use like a desktop, just like an iPad kind of person. Oh, there's a hand. Oh, my God. OK, that's incredible. I would love to speak with you later. I think it's fascinating. It's just the mouse cursor, and the double click. I'm sort of an older vintage human, and so I grew up with this as being the default. Anyhow, I'm going to play this video now so we can have a look at it, this little video. So this shows macOS Finder doing single click and double click. And when you're in this mode, which is this kind of list mode, there's a conflict going on. If you click a single click, you change your selection. And if you do a double click, you open all of the items that you have selected. You see why that is complicated? Like if I have these two things selected, And if single click and double click were kind of like, you implemented that, so to speak, in a program the same way, you would always single click when you double clicked, right? Because the first click of a double click is a single click, obviously. So it gets complicated. So double click and single click in this scenario they conflict. So you gotta, again, use time, use the kind of tricks that we've seen in other things like the text cursor and the menu. In other scenarios, like in this one, I'm sorry. Let's see, can we go back a slide? Thank you so much. There's a teamwork in this conference that are like absolutely amazing and are helping me out here. And so let's see if we can get, there it goes. Sorry, if I'm looking down, I'm just looking at what you're seeing up there. So here we see the same thing going on with single click and double click, but here they don't conflict. So this is, again, just macOS Finder, but just in a different mode where they do not conflict. So the selection kind of works in a different way here. Don't ask me why, I don't know, but it does. And it's a good example, I think, since a lot of us can just try this out of our own. And so here you can make double click and single click, more importantly, single click faster, since you don't have to have that sort of time delay. And so a couple of things that I wanted to bring up about double click. First off, double click actually requires fine motor skill. And if you're a young, healthy human, like you're like, come on, how hard can it be, Like I got one of these smartphones that, I can tap twice with my button on the side. And sometimes I'm a healthy, not so young human. And sometimes that's hard for me. And not everyone, are as, lucky as I am to have a fine motor skill. So that's something to keep in mind. If there can be scenarios too where, let's say, we have something that you have to do like in a hurry, where we're using, a lot of muscular movement and stuff like that. Double click can actually be a really tough thing to pull off. It's a well-established pattern, and so this, from a designer's perspective, is a positive. It means that, if you build something, you put it in front of just some rando, and you say, take it away, Robin. They will probably try to scroll and click, and double click and drag. Like, these are the things that people just they just assume this is how computers work, They're not going to try to speak with it, probably. They're not going to try to rotate the screen to see if it happens, probably. Maybe they will. But this is something that people are probably just going to try, and so if you have some onboarding stuff, you can just probably skip the double-click part. In Figma, for example, if you're in the file browser part, you double-click to open a file, and we never had to explain that to anyone. And finally, double-click doesn't work for touch. I mean, you can have double touch, but it's pretty awkward. And, again, it's a fine motor skill sort of situation. If someone, vibrates a little bit, shakes a little bit, that can be a double touch. So I would just think of it as double click or double touch, not a thing. Don't even try it. So our takeaways here is that, double click is really good when you can both select things and open things, as we saw in the example videos. You can kind of leverage that. There are also some tricks we can do here with the button down, or sort of the mouse press down. If you remember the pop-up menu that we looked at before, that is kind of a trick using this. So, we care a lot about the latency, right, of when I press a button until the thing on the screen happens after I press the button. And so double click obviously will delay that, right? Since I click and we have to wait a little bit, and then it happens. And so to the user, it feels a little slow. And with the pop-up menu, we saw a trick there where when we start pressing down, that's when we show the menu. And then as I'm lifting my finger up, the menu is already on the screen, right? So it feels really snappy. OK. Tap or scroll. This is a fun one. Moving into the current time instead of old desktop computers. So we have your, regular touchscreen, and there's a link under here. And I'm just pressing on that link, and then I'm scrolling. This is kind of, obviously, this is how it works, right? But it's also you guys starting to see a pattern here? So we can't just open the link if you press on it, right? Because then how do you scroll? Especially if, some of these web pages today, everything is clickable. So a takeaway from this one, and I know this is a very short one, is to be kind of careful when you use touch start events. This is a very practical takeaway, I think, on touchscreen content. There are some websites usually out there, even some apps, but usually websites, that try to be clever about that responsiveness that we were talking about by using a touchdown event. But then sort of like forgetting about scrolling, and so you scroll this article, maybe you're reading, and you happen to put down your finger on an image and keep scrolling, and now there's an image on the screen, and you didn't know what just happened, and it feels awkward. Okay. Before I move on, how are we feeling? Is this good pacing? Are we interested? Are we snoozing? I see. Okay. Okay. Thank you for that. So input modality. What is it even? It sounds like something I looked up on Wikipedia. So what do you think happens if I'm clicking here? I don't know if you can see the text cursor. I realize it's a little hard to see. It's in the middle of the screen, pretty much, just on the right side of the menu. And this is just a screenshot from Figma. This is not like a made-up picture. So I've selected a couple of layers, right? Maybe I took my sweet time to select them. Had a little coffee, kept selecting, and I'm like, precious selection. And I right-click, open the menu, and I realized that I forgot to select something else. And so I just click outside the menu to close the menu. What happens here? Do we select this like N with a acute apostrophe kind of thing going on? Or do we just close the menu? It will depend on the software. In my opinion, what should happen is this. Nothing changes underneath, the menu closes. Right? And this is what I mean with the modality. And I'll get to the input part in a second. So think of this as like having different modes. When the menu is open, we're in the mode of the menu. And when the menu is not open, we're in the mode of whatever was behind the menu. When the menu is open, we're not in the same mode. That's confusing. And sometimes some software does that. And what it does to us is create this kind of nervousness. And I'll get back to that in a few minutes at the end of this talk. And so here's just another example of the same thing. This is more of a real-world example that at least I find a little confusing until I think about it. So what happens when we click here? I made the mouse cursor larger here so you can see it. What happens? Am I going to call these people in this conversation? There's a call button here. I don't know if you can see it, but the mouse cursor is on top of a call button. But pay attention, there's a menu open, a system menu open in the corner. Obviously, I think intuitively, I should not call my friends when I'm closing the menu, right? The menu closes, my click does not kind of call my friends. But in some cases, in some software, it does. And then I'll be like, holy smokes, I just call my friends while I just tried to close a menu. So just something to keep in mind. And so here's kind of how I would think about the input part and modality part put together. Okay, so we have this little like stream of input events, right? Like imagine I'm like moving the mouse around or the finger on the screen, whatever. There's like all these like little input events, mouse moved or key pressed. And as they're flowing into one of your modes, right? This is about the modality. So, and right now it's flowing into like the windows that are on the screen or the current window that's on the screen, right? In our Figma example, it would be like on the canvas. I would change my selection if I clicked. And when the menu is open, we have a different mode. There's modality going on, right? We're switching from one place to another. Now our input events go to the menu. And so that means that if I'm clicking on the outside, I'm clicking in the mode of the menu. I'm not clicking in the mode of the window below the menu. And so a couple of takeaways here is that we can leverage this input modality to connect the mental model of this temporary layer with what is on the screen. So what I mean with the kind of mental model is kind of the picture we have in our minds of how the system in front of us works. And what we see on the screen is what it actually looks like. And usually what we see on the screen is what very much influences the mental picture that we form in our minds, right, of how something works. And this is what we use to form expectations about what's going to happen next, right? So if I clicked outside the menu to close it, and I called my friends by accident, I'll be like, whoa, 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 Then at that point, I will now form my ideas about what's going to happen next. Let's say I open a window and I click on my desktop behind it. What happens, right? I'm going to assume that something similar happens. And so that kind of reinforces and creates a mental model in our minds. And those things are like actually pretty hard to change. So imagine that we ship something, we realize this was a problem. We changed the way those menus worked so that when you click outside, we just close the menu. Now we're going to have all of these users who have a different mental model and different expectations. And it's going to feel really awkward to them because now they've gotten used to just clicking on the outside, right, to call their friends, right? And the menu closes at the same time. And so I would say that while it sounds like I have a very strong opinion of which is the right way, I think it's the most important part is that it's consistent, right? If you click outside of the menu and something, you call your friends, make sure that's the case everywhere all the time in your entire system. And if you're on the web platform, it's kind of like your own planet. You make up your own rules. Anyhow, I'm blabbing. Let's move on. This one is fun because I got to make a couple of buttons, and buttons are fun. Sometimes I think about buttons as the stairwells of architecture, but for us designers. We start out with a button, and then we're like, okay, I nailed the shadow on this button. You got inner shadow, outer shadow, outer shadow, and your software developers, they're like, whew, dude, what have you done to this poor button? And then you build everything else that kind of feels like that button. Anyhow, so let's have a look at a couple of these ones. So we got our humble web link here. It's an oldie but goodie. Two things going on. First off, we call attention to this with a little underline and a little hand. Yeah, the cursor changes as it moves over the text to indicate that this is something special about this. It's interactive, and that's the feedback we're getting, right? That a cursor changes to this I think of this as like a Mickey Mouse hand or something like that. A little glove. Okay, so here we have a variation on the hyperlink. This is probably something that's more common today, since early on with hyperlinks, it was pretty expensive to redraw the screen, and this is like a little detour that I think is interesting. And actually, most computers work like this still today. And so you have two different layers on the computer. You have everything on your screen except the mouse cursor, and then you have, and this is often implemented in hardware even today on your graphics card. And then you have the mouse cursor. It's a different display kind of on top of it. And so changing the mouse cursor requires a lot less energy and computational power than changing anything on the screen. And so today, our computers are just infinitively fast. We can just have things spinning and jumping everywhere. But that wasn't true in the 80s or the 90s. And so changing the mouse cursor was a really good way, a really cheap way of giving you that feedback of interaction, that this hyperlink is clickable. Here we're doing both today again. We can change anything on the screen. It basically has no cost. So we can show the underline on here. We kind of make this even more clear. So here's something that's a little different. Is this clickable? Do we even know it's clickable? This doesn't give us any indication of clickability until we happen to move over it. So, some of our alarm bells are going off. Either this is really fun, either this is a hidden little fun thing, or it's just a really confusing thing, depending on the context. Okay, it's a little different. So here we just make it look like something different than text, right? And notice there's no change to anything as we're moving over this. Yet I don't think anyone would expect this to not be a clickable thing, right? It looks like that old button that we were talking about. So let's see. Sorry. Okay. Here we got a variation on it. Let's try to minimize it a little bit. A lot of buttons in Figma look like this, or the confusing one I was telling you about before. And there are good reasons for that one, and we can talk about that in Q&A if you want. But I think sometimes if we're looking for that minimalism, but we still need to communicate to people what is interactive, this can be a good middle ground, where there's some difference to it when nothing is over it, and as our pointer moves over it, you can tell. Obviously, on touch devices, you don't have hover feedback, right? And so it's very important to make it clear what's clickable in those scenarios. And here we have another variant I'm going to kind of click through this because you guys know what I'm talking about. Here we got the hand changing instead of the button itself. Here we got the everything in one menu button, sorry. I just like felt when I was making these buttons, I like made each little like HTML button, and I kind of made a screen recording for you. And I was like, oh, I should make like a crazy button that has like all of the things. So that's that. I hope you like it. It's my favorite button. Okay. So a takeaway from this is that we want to make it clear what is interactive, and kind of what does something versus what is inert. Inert meaning sort of like what is sort of not reactive, what is just completely chill. And subsequently, where is it safe to click? It must be clear to the user where it's safe to click, what is interactive, and so on. Otherwise, there's this stress in the background. There's this kind of broken promises, calling our friends back and closing the menu, that sort of thing. And so let me skip ahead here to a little overview. So we looked at these 6, 7 different things. The blinking text cursor, right? As we're looking for it, it should blink or maybe do something else, I don't know, to call our attention to where it is. We can find it quickly. And as we're typing, we want to make it very clear where it is so it moves with us and not blinking. The text cursor moving up and down and around. If you're implementing your own text editor, you want to make sure to nail this one and about 50 other ones like this that I haven't talked about. It makes me humble, at least, to realize before I dug into this to understand how it works, it's like, how hard can it be? It's just text editing. Learning about this, I'm like, humble gods of people who implemented text editing. Kudos to you. OK, I'm going to move on. I think you all read that when I was talking, and I'm sorry about that. There's a theme here that's about psychological safety. And now this is not the best term for it. It's just the best one I could come up with. Hit me up if you have a better idea for it. But really what I'm talking about here is a thread that goes through all of the examples that we looked at, in that if we can form a really good mental model, we can form very good expectations. And good, I mean what the expectations we have, how well do they match reality? Right? If I click outside of the menu, does it just close? Or does it call my friends? Depends on, the right thing there depends on what expectations I have, right? And the expectations I have are part of my mental model that I've formed by using software. And in some scenarios, I've been using software that smells and looks and walks just like your software, right? If it's an app on Android or iOS, I've used many other apps on Android and iOS before, and your app is going to smell and walk and look just like the other apps to me as a user. And so I will have already a pretty comprehensive mental model around what to expect from your app. So something to keep in mind. So it's OK to take risks, to relax and to get into the flow, all without fear of any negative consequences. And this is how I would sum up the idea. OK. The second part, and there's just 2 parts there, is efficiency. I think there's a thread here of efficiency. The menu, press, release, drag, is just a quick way of navigating a menu, although it can be awkward if you're not expecting it. Same with sort of text navigation, right? Moving up and moving down with the text memory. If we didn't have the memory, we would still be able to edit text. We would just be slower at it, right? It's not like we wouldn't be able to. OK, so when the road ahead is clear, we can move quickly without any worry. But when it's not, we'll be like, oh, stop here, and we'll be a lot slower. OK. Maybe I can bring up one more thing that is kind of unrelated to this that I am very excited about, and I thought I just mentioned. And after this, we're going to do Q&A. So this is the first time I tell anyone publicly about this. Just a few friends and family know about this. I've started a company to build a new operating system for people like us who like software. And so there will be early access in 2024, next year. You can go to this internet homepage that you see on the screen, and you can put in your little email address, and you will get an email in a year or so. I'm very excited about this. I've been working on this for quite a few years at this point. It's finally reality. So I'm really happy that I could share this with you all today. Thank you. Thank you. And the audience in here and everyone online, you've been absolutely wonderful. You made me feel comfortable here on the stage. It's a really large kind of physical space here. It's very intimidating, but you all made me feel good, so thank you for that. And a very, very, very big thank you to Figma and Config. And when I say Figma, I mean the whole community. To me, it's like this kind of fluid, weird, family thing, of thousands of people everywhere around the world helping each other. It's pretty awesome. OK, so thank you so much. We're going to do Q&A. There are 2 microphones up here. You have 2 aisles each side of the center stage here. There are 2 microphones each side. If you have a question, put your arm up like this, and I'm going to point to you. If I point to you, hit the nearest microphone, OK? Let's do Q&A. Questions. Right over there.
Hey, Rasmus, thank you. That's really great. You kind of went into the depth of what I think is paper cuts usually when we're playing around with software, and there's so many little things that we get used to, but we get hurt every time we kind of make a mistake. So a bit of a 2-parter here. I'm going to start with Figma. You guys thought of selection very specifically, perhaps slightly differently than, say, Mac does or OS does, where if I add objects to selection or remove them, they're treated as first-class actions where undo actually takes you back and forward. Mac doesn't do it. And that's where a lot of the times with multi-selection mistakes happen. Question is why after so many years they don't? Why isn't something like selection or changing volume a first-class action that I can just undo, redo because I may have made a mistake? And how did Figma kind of come about to take that decision? So that's part 1. Part 2 is, as we saw, perhaps you maybe have noticed it more, a lot of these things, as you bring them up, they look like surprises. Hey, I didn't think of the cursor going up and down. So it seems like these are sort of behaviors that we very quickly get used to. They kind of become second nature to us, even when we sort of switch different OSs. Like the one that I recently been struggling with is pressing a new line in a text editor is like a different modifier key for different softwares. Like ChatGPT is Shift, with Twitter it's Command Control. And so.
Do you mind if we just take your first question?
Yeah, OK.
So make sure that we have time for everything. I really appreciate it, though. Paper cuts, I think that's a good word for it. With the selection model of Figma, I would be confused if selecting text in a text editor was part of the undo stack, right? Just intuitively speaking here. While it's in Figma, intuitively it feels right that undo modifies the selection. I think just inherently there is there's a very explicit action you're taking about selection, and sometimes you can go into a place where you spend literally minutes just setting your selection, right? And a single click somewhere can clear that selection. And it's important for other reasons that it should, right? And so everything is a balance, right? You got different constraints. And so the model there really is again, the mental model we're having in our minds are different. And we figured that since Figma looks and feels and smells a little differently from, say, text editing or file selection, people will be able to build a different mental model and have a different set of expectations. Now, if we succeeded, I'm not sure.
If it gets used to it very quickly, how much time do you as a designer spend on optimizing something like this? What's the right amount of time to spend on this, given everybody gets used to it?
I think your microphone wasn't on there, but I mean, we spent a lot of time on figuring this out of Figma, a lot of time. Smart selection, for example, we spent 1 full year of research and development for the thing that aligns things. So just in general. Now I don't work at Figma anymore, but when I did, we did spend a lot of time on each little thing. Yeah. Thank you so much. I see some people have lined up here at the microphone. I think that's okay too. Do you mind if I take this person over here?
Hello. So interaction design is incredibly important, especially in the accessibility community. I love that you brought up that people with tremors have issues with double taps. And I'm thinking about accessibility all the time just as a component designer for my global team. I've been thinking a lot about how COVID impacts just your brain fog. There's so many things that have been happening all over the world to people with COVID, and how this might impact how we're changing things when we're designing things to be interactive with. Have you noticed anything as far as like post-COVID, if there are interactions changing within the space?
That's an interesting question. I haven't thought much about it, to be honest. I will now after you bring this up. Just on the, I don't know, there's some expression on the tip of my toe or something. Trying to think right on top of my head. I mean, there's been their whole remote culture. That's been something that we've seen exploding, right? So I'm sure there's something to it in terms of interactions, especially with like, video conferencing. How that relates to like, our bodies and motor skills and accessibility in general, I'm not sure about. But let me think about it, and maybe we can talk more if there's other people curious, like after this Q&A.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, man. So question, not Figma related, a little higher level. You mentioned earlier with your example of the modality of the choice that we're making between, like, when I click off of a window, does it release the modal or do I call my friend? And the annoyance maybe, or the confusingness of that. Not to presume what you're doing with Playbit, but what are maybe just one example of kind of interaction patterns that you see now that you find that are accepted, but you find to be annoying or confusing that you think could be better?
Oh God, I think that where do I?
Sorry.
No, this is a good question. I mean, this is just me speaking, and I'm not saying this is right or wrong, but there are just like a lot of annoying things on your average website today, the commercial ones especially. I see an article a friend share on somewhere, and I open it, and there's like, there's a piece of text that's the first line of the article. Then there's like ads or whatever, they feel like ads, and the cookie banners. And cookie banners that like have the slowest animation you've ever seen, And then like there's an X button, but it doesn't work while the animation is going, so I have to click it and smash it. And I think that whatever you call all of those things, and then also there's several software that tries to like get my attention really. Like if I start scrolling and reading the article, and if I like stop scrolling for like a little while, it like pops a thing up. It says subscribe now for like 10% off or something. Those things drive me absolutely mad, and I just like rage quit those things, because to me that means that I now have to just sit and scroll as I'm reading, right? Otherwise I'm in this like mental unsafety zone. So to me, that whole thing, whatever you call that, like trying to hijack my attention, shouting at me all the time, makes me very uncomfortable.
Sure. Thanks, man.
Thank you. Okay, we'll take another one here. Yeah, please, go ahead.
Hi, thanks for sharing. What does the conversation look like? You mentioned earlier it's okay to take risks. To do like a temperature check on when that risk is too risky, especially if you're trying to innovate.
Interesting. It's a broad question, this. I think that taking risks is crucial to the work that we do. If we weren't taking risks, like we just like copy pasta, in a sense, in a very high level sense. Like a good model might be to think about taking risks with a well-formed opinion that you have, or together with your team, right? So you might form like a hypothesis around something. Maybe it's rooted in who you identify as a company or a group of people or whatnot. And you say, this is something I believe in. And now you take a risk in that direction, right? It could be so that maybe you say, I'm making a text editor, and I was saying the text thing is blinking, right? And instead of blinking, maybe it's like going up and down, like as a wiggly thing. And you're like, all the other things, like we're the wiggly people, and you make it wiggly. And that's a risk because it's like weird and strange. but it could pay off. And so how do you know if it pays off or if the risk is just like missing the target? You just have to test it and try it out.
Thank you.
Thanks. We're going to take a question over here.
Yeah. Hey, thanks for sharing. I have a question regarding like the next superhuman operating system. So I think in the last years we saw like superhumanification of SaaS and mail and all that. And I think like the current way we interact with computers is like highly dependent on the keyboard, mouse, touchpad. Let's like imagine in 10 years we have like a thought-to-text interface, and we have a vision headset from Apple to like have a very accurate eye tracking. Do you think this will like completely change the way, first like our efficiency with a computer? We talked about efficiency like very quickly. Or do you think like most things will stay the same, but we just have another kind of input to the computer?
I mean, we're trying to predict the future here, so we're absolutely 100% going to be wrong, right? But no, I think first off, I think it's not going to be that soon. Like the emotional part of me is like, oh yeah, it's going to be tomorrow, and the rational part of me is like, wait a second, it's never been true in the past that we think it's going to be tomorrow when we are excited. Anyhow, even if it's in 1,000 years or 5 years, doesn't matter. Like, what does it look like? Yeah, I do think what you were bringing up as I'm assuming your own opinions. I'm kind of aligned with that. I think that when we have kind of brain-computer interfaces and some way, I don't know if it's these ski goggles or if it's something different, but some way of like getting information to us like without sitting in front of a desk. It will have a profound impact, I think, on the way we work and like what it means to be a designer. Obviously, that's even changing now with AI, and as we saw at the keynote, what Figma is launching today, it's already starting to happen. Like the tasks we're doing as designers are starting to change. We're still designers. It's not like our jobs are going away. The things that we do in our jobs will just change, right?
Okay.
Thank you. It's a good thought, Nat.
Yeah. Okay.
We'll take another question from this aisle here.
Hello, thank you very much. On your topic of psychological safety, what kind of came to mind to me was watching my grandmother trying to use her phone and how many of these like rules and even like buttons and search bars, like she just doesn't understand, and it's very intimidating for her to use new apps. Like she memorizes a sequence of steps to navigate rather than really using it as an interface. I guess my question to this is, do you think, looking at future interfaces, do you think this generational gap will always exist? Or will we get to a point where things are so intuitive that anyone can use it without learning these rules?
Good question. Also, your grandma sounds like an awesome person that she uses a smartphone, I assume. First, when you first said phone, in my mind was like a rotary phone, dial phone, flip phone, a smartphone. I was like, it's probably not a smartphone, but that's pretty cool. I think that generational gap is always going to be true. I think it's just like in our human nature that someone once said, and I'm paraphrasing to keep it short, is that anything invented before you were born is just uninteresting and boring. Anything invented before you're 30 is exciting and just like all the rage. Anything invented after you're 30 is just wrong, So I think there's some human aspects to this, that the things that we're familiar with, they are, it's like, tying my shoes. I learned that when I was a kid, and now I don't think about tying my shoes. It's not a ceremony, But then trying something out, like one of these like large language models with AI, it's like a novelty to me, and I'm like, wow, this is interesting, So, that's just my take on it. That it will always be that gap, and that's okay. I think like now with AI happening, you're either a believer or you're a skeptic, and whatever, doesn't matter, right? But you're essentially going to be on one side of history or the other, and it's not clear which one, right? And personally, I try to just be always on. I'm now like way beyond 30, and so I have that intuition of like, oh, that's wrong, whoa. And I'm always trying to be, excuse me, on the side of yes, let's do it, right? Even though it might feel uncomfortable.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thanks. We're gonna take another question over here. Also, by the way, we're over time here. I see a lot of people are already gone. If you want to go, don't feel like awkward about it. Just head out. And the people arranging this too, like, just give me the wavy thing, like when we're using too much time, and we'll cut it off.
Yeah.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you for your sharing your presentation today. For your new operation system, like when it comes to interaction, what would be the big difference, like compared to current existing OS?
I don't know yet. we haven't built it. I mean, you got to sign up for early access so you can try it out. Sorry, that's a cop-out answer. I think that the best software just perfectly balances on the line of novelty and familiarity. And so if something is too novel, meaning something is just too different and too strange for you, it's really hard to approach it and to start using it. Right? Think about the first time you used Figma, right? There were probably some parts of Figma that felt very obvious, like there's a toolbar, you know, and there are buttons, I can click them, obvious, familiar, and there's some other parts to it that are unfamiliar and novel, right? And so finding that balance is right. And so with Playbit and this operating system, we're trying to strike a balance between the familiarity, right? So you can expect something that looks very similar to your kind of run-of-the-mill Mac OS and Windows, but of course has some magical capabilities underneath it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Rasmus. Thank you for walking us through this. It's really exciting to imagine a better OS. I think that within that, it's really interesting how good design tends to kind of break down barriers, like having Figma as a easy-to-use, accessible design tools takes design as a craft from this like esoteric thing that you need to study to like anything that anyone can kind of hop in and figure it out as you go. That being said, good design tends to feel like something that's inaccessible or super premium, and I'm really curious about the imagination you have for Playbit and how you, what will Playbit be and how do you intend to allow the world to touch it?
Wow, that's a big question. It's a good one. It tickles my mind for sure. I think it will feel like there's a lot less choice. Today, I feel, from a software engineer's perspective, and this is maybe from a different lens. I don't know you. I'm not sure if you identify as a software engineer or designer. By the way, designer. Yeah. From a software engineer's perspective, at least, which is kind of what Playbit is focused on to begin with, is that of today. There's a lot of noise. There's a lot of choice. There's which programming language, which framework, which of the 200 AWS services, or maybe I should probably use Vercel instead. You know, there's a lot of choice, there's a lot of noise, and it comes from, you know, a lot of history, and I'm not going to stand here and talk about. And so part of the Playbit experience is removing a lot of that noise, but still being familiar. Like if there are programming languages you're using today, or concepts like, you know, reactive UI programming, like you can still use that in Playbit. It's not a different like planet by itself. I don't know if that scratches the surface of an answer for you.
I think that it does, and I guess, just curious about like, is Playbit going to be for like the designers, or is it going to be for like the world?
Sorry, I forgot to address that. Yes, I can't remember exactly the words used, but sort of, you know, about design can be like a feel like that feels a little insular maybe sometimes. Yeah, I think it's very important. I don't have a good answer for it. I hope Playbit can do something about it. I don't know what it is. I think we all can do stuff about it today, though, like not thinking about Playbit or even Figma. There's, you know, a couple of years ago, I felt like an outsider for the type design industry. Like I was making my first sort of kind of, you know, real big typeface. And that was very intimidating. And a lot of the people I met, they felt a little bit like what I imagine is feeling like if you're a young designer trying to get into what I would call our field. And to me, it felt like I don't even know where to puncture the bubble, right? And just getting to puncturing the bubble, like imagine like a balloon, is scary just in itself to like walk up there. I have to build up courage and then do that. And then after puncturing the balloon to get into like the, you know, the inner circle, like trying to avoid the, you know, the frowny faces, right? Of like, oh, you're not a type designer. People didn't do this to me. I'm just exaggerating here, right? So I think the best thing we can do is just like help people like feel comfortable to puncture that bubble and showing them like a path in. And it can be like, oh, hey, do you want to help me with this open source project? Or here's like a Figma file like that I made. Here's a copy for you. Why don't you like fill this like blank part out? Or, I don't know. These I'm just thinking on the top of my head here.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. We'll take a question over here.
Yeah. Hey, Rasmus. I just want to shout out to Inter. I love this typeface. Just curious, would you design more?
Can you repeat that?
Would you design more typography, fonts, whatever?
If I would design, I'm sorry, maybe I'm getting a little tired. If I would design more?
Typeface.
Oh God. Yeah, I mean, I've been working on Inter since 2016, and I'm still working on it right now. There's probably another 10 years to go until like I wouldn't touch it again. So unlikely. But who knows? Yeah, there are a lot of people have been asking about like a monotype version of it, for example. What I would say though, in terms of typeface, is like, sure, Inter is a big project. There's a lot of work behind it. But something that's really wonderful about designing a typeface is that it's very gradual. You can spend a Sunday, and at the end of that Sunday, from nothing, from never having designed a typeface before, to the end of the Sunday actually having a typeface with a few letters, not all of them in the world, right? But a couple of ones you can write in your own like font, you know? That is doable in a Sunday. And then you can spend another 25 years to refining that if you want to, right? Or another weekend, like anything goes. And that's something that I found really, really wonderful about that process, that if I put in 5 minutes here, or 5 months here, like the 5 minutes are not throwaway, which I think is often the case with UI design. I can't really do much with even an hour sometimes. I kind of need 2 hours.
Cool, thanks.
Thank you. We'll take another question here.
Hi, you talked about the differences between expectations on different platforms, like touch versus desktop. I wonder, as like seeing a culture moving towards cross-platform applications or a singular app deployed across platforms, how do you think these developers should think about these differences in expectations when building a singular app?
This is a great question. I think of it as this way. Forget about technology. Think about people. Think about the one person who's going to use your thing, right? Take just an example. Maybe they're a Windows user, right? Whatever, doesn't matter. And now what are their expectations on software? They're not going to give a crap if it's like an Electron app or like a Windows app, or there are many different kinds of Windows apps. You know, like they're not going to care of any of that, right? They just want to like do their thing that your app does, right? And they will come with certain expectations. And now you have a choice to make. Either you just put in the work that is required to match their expectations, or you do not. In either case, you will have a budgeting balancing, right? There's no like silver bullet to this. Either you will just spend that time there making that really good, and maybe you will have fewer features, or you will have a lot more features, but people won't feel as comfortable using them, right? The expectations won't match. So I think that is really simplifying this. Obviously, there's much more to it, but again, like people are going to have expectations. No one cares about the technology that it's built in. Your decision is whether you want to match the expectations or if you want to spend that time on like building features. My opinion is that you should spend time on making it match people's expectations. I think when software feels really good, has like an incredible value that is hard to measure in numbers. It's really easy to measure in numbers like retention and feature use, right? So those things tend to be much easier to say, oh, we got $10,000 here. If we spend it on this feature, we're going to get this amount of money back, right? Done. Let's do the feature. Whereas when it comes to expectations and quality and the feeling of something, what's the vocabulary there, right? So I think we usually tend to take that path and we say, let's just build a web app and we put it on all the platforms. And we'll do some little if-defs here and there to make it work some touch, and it'll be fine, and people will figure it out. And then software feels icky. It feels kind of weird. So yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
We'll take a question over here.
Hi.
Just one moment, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Last question, please. Last question. Thank you so much. By the way, I will come off the stage, and we can talk in person afterwards outside here. Please go ahead.
With all of the new VR and everything coming out, do you think the interactions on those platforms will be the same as the traditional ones you mentioned here? And if not, how do you think like companies will come to a consensus on what interactions to go with for like the new traditional for those platforms?
Yeah, another great question. Man, you guys are a smart bunch. I feel even smaller now. No, don't worry. This is a good question. I think if you looked at the Apple device, I think it's very interesting how they put like Windows in this virtual environment, right? They put Windows, they look just like the Windows that we use today on our current computers. And I think that comes back to something that I was talking about with another attendant here a couple of minutes ago about familiarity and novelty. I think eventually, like the evolution will look like it has done in the past for pretty much everything. Like think about, this is outside of the scope of our life experience, but horses and cars. There was a period of time when people were just like, horses with carriages was like, that's just like the default. And then came this thing called a horseless carriage, right? Even in the name, it's like, that was the car that eventually got its own name, right? And that felt weird. And the first ones were actually like a carriage, but you just removed the horse, and it kind of worked roughly the same as a horse. And then it evolved into a car, and today, a carriage with horses and a car operate very differently. The same thing kind of happened with iPhone, a smaller scale. But if you look at the early iPhone UI, it was very sort of, there was a lot of skeuomorphism, which is kind of anchoring things in physical reality that we all are pretty familiar with, mapping that onto screen concepts. And now it evolved into this like thing that feels very native to that type of device. So I think the same thing is going to happen to virtual reality. And I'm also really excited to see what that means for AI. I think right now we have this text interface to a lot of these language models. And I think that's just a stopping gap. I think that's a stepping stone, sorry. Right? So obviously we can't predict the future, but I think there's got to be something else coming where we figure out how a car works, but for AI, Or like a movie instead of a theatrical play. That was another kind of forking around. Thank you all so much. Again, I'll be outside here. More questions. Thank you.